Well, I've decided to make an in-grade cutting board for my grandparents. What I have is I've already cut all my strips to the width that I want. Now I need to stand them up on edge, put glue on them, and I'll be able to join it all together. The most important thing about the length that you cut your strips is going to determine the thickness of your board when you're done, or how many strips, which will determine the length that you get. And to point out, the walnut that I had, it wasn't quite long enough for what I wanted to do, so I ended up just doubling it over, and there's a gap right here, but it's going to be all glued together, and that piece will get cut out when I'm cutting the strips. Now you'll notice that some of these pieces have different widths to them, and that's going to add to the effect that I have the design in my mind for the cutting board. Now I'm flipping all the pieces over except for the last one here. That's going to stay how it is. Now I'll be able to put glue on all of these. Now to make sure I spread the glue around real evenly, I'm just going to use an acid brush. Now that I've got all my pieces glued up, I'm going to go ahead and start flipping them back over so that the glue surface will meet up. Now I want one side of this to be nice and flat for a good reference point, and that way I don't waste too much excess. So I'm just going to take one of my cauls here that I've put some tape across so the glue don't stick to it, and I'll go ahead, put it on the edge, and start fitting all my boards up to it. Now that I have that in nice and fairly square, I can go ahead and start clamping everything together. I'm just going to apply a little bit of pressure right now. That way everything will still be set up when I go to put my cauls on to keep the board level. Alright, as you can see, things moved around a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and snug up these clamps a little bit more, and then I'll be putting on the cauls to keep the board nice and flat. So I've got my cauls on, I've got everything clamped up. Now all I just need to do is go around and snug everything up. And I think I could probably add a few more clamps. We'll see. Alright, the glue's dried. I've taken it out of the clamps. Now I have a bit of squeeze out to clean up. I could have wiped it off with a rag when I was clamping it all together, but I don't want to have any glue-starved joints. So I'm going to go ahead and just use this paint scraper like Norm did. I don't have a card scraper. Now that I've got all the big glue spots off, I could try and send this through my planer, which I feel would be fine with the grain in this direction. But unfortunately it's a little too wide for my planer, so I'm not going to be able to send it through. So I'm going to be planing it by hand. Alright, I finally got my board nice and flat on both sides. I do have to say I have a newfound respect for you guys that plane everything by hand. That's the most planing I've ever done by hand. And it's some work, but I really enjoyed it. I got a nice flat surface here. So I'm going to go ahead and start cutting each piece, each strip at about 1 1/4 inches. I have a stop block set up here, and I've just clamped a piece of scrap to my fence. And then I have this little spacer piece right here, so that once I have the board set up, I could take my spacer out, and then I could go ahead and run my sled across, and I'm not going to have to worry about it binding up in there. It'll be able to kick free and not get bound up in the blade. Alright, so I've got all my pieces cut, and it looks pretty plain like this, but if I flip every other one over, you'll see that it has a nice design that's starting to take shape. And now I have all my pieces set up how I want them, every other one flipped over to alternate the pattern. And this came out quite nice. So I'm going to go ahead and start on the glue up for that. I'm going to go ahead and flip all of them over except for the last one. I'm going to start with this because it's taking up a bit of space. And what I've done is I couldn't find any butcher's paper, or that, well yeah, I guess it's butcher's paper, that wax coated paper. But I had some saran wrap in the kitchen, so I went and grabbed that, and hopefully that'll create a nice barrier so the glue don't stick. So now that I got glue on all my joints, I'm going to go ahead and clamp it together. I'm going to try and get these edges as flat as I can to keep everything lined up. Now all I got to do is let that dry overnight, come back tomorrow, clean it up. Alright, so I've let the glue dry overnight. After a couple hours of it drying how it was, I came and flipped it over. That way I can get air circulation across both the top and the bottom to help the glue dry a bit better. And using the saran wrap, the plastic wrap, actually worked out pretty good. I didn't need the wax paper. This was a bit more difficult to use than wax paper, but it still worked out. The glue released from it quite easily. So I'm going to go ahead, unclamp this, and get started on sanding it. Now this is a lot of glue to clean up, so I'm going to start with the 60 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to probably finish with the 220 grit. Alright, now I got everything sanded nice and flat, smooth. I'm going to go ahead and use a 1/4 inch roundover bit and clean up all these edges. Now using a 1/2 inch cove bit, I'm going to go ahead and cut in a recess right here for a little finger grip, because this will be the bottom side of the cutting board. I have my bit recessed in my router a little lower than I want the final cut, because I have a feeling I'm going to get a lot of tear out doing this cut. So I've backed the bit up a bit, and then when I make my final pass, I'll go ahead, lower the bit back, and hopefully it'll clean up a lot of that tear out that I'm expecting to get. And I actually had very minimal tear out, but a little bit of burn. So now when I go ahead and lower my bit, or extend my bit out further for the final pass, I should be good. Now to take care of the roundover for these edges here, I'm just going to go ahead and sand it by hand. And I'll try my best to match the profile that's here. Now I'm going to apply a nice finish to it. You could use all kinds of different finishes, but really you want to stick with something that's going to be food safe. You're going to be cutting food on here. So I have some, I believe it's some sort of vegetable oil, grape or, I don't know. I got it from my mother-in-law. I normally don't cook with any type of oil, so I got this from my mother-in-law. But I'm going to go ahead and apply this and let it soak in. Now using a clean rag, I'm going to just rub it in a little bit across the surface. Now I'll let that set for a couple hours. I can already see that the grain of the wood is absorbing and just sucking that oil in really good. So, wow, maybe not even a couple hours. Maybe in about 30 minutes or so I'll come back and apply some more. Alright, it's been about 30 minutes, and if I flip this over, I can see that the oak did a really great job of absorbing the oil. However, the walnut, the cherry, and the Bubinga didn't do so well. So this is going to take a few coats. I'm going to put one more heavy coat on right now, let it set probably overnight, and then I'll come back tomorrow and I'll finish it up. Wow, that oak is really just sucking up the oil, so I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit more on. And I'm going to leave this floating across the top. I don't want to wipe off the excess or anything like that. I want it to just soak all the way through. Alright, it seems to have soaked all the way through. See, I got some runoff down there. It's really seeping through good. So I'm just going to go ahead, wipe off all the excess, and check back in a little bit, make sure I don't have any more bleeding out, and this will be ready to go. I hope you guys enjoyed this project, and if you did, please comment, rate, and subscribe. I try and have a new woodworking video out every week. So have fun and be safe.